Greetings exiles and welcome back to the third episode of this Wintertide brand experiment. Last episode we stopped at farming Ritual, trying to get our hands on a cold damage Light of Meaning. We have a lot of upgrades to make this episode and a ton of progression coming up, so we have no time to waste. It was time to blast some ritual altars and take down the King in the Mists. Let's get to it. And without too much effort, we have our jewel. Then, with a quick passive respec on the tree, we have just added a lot of increased cold damage to our build. However, for what I wanted to farm next, we were going to need even more damage. We had already upgraded a lot of our gear pieces last time around, but there were a few noticeable upgrades missing still. One of the big upgrades, which would add a lot of damage to our build, was of course our staff upgrade, as we hadn't even upgraded that since the very start of maps. Normally, I would buy a fractured cold damage over time multiplier staff, and then alt spam it until it rolls +3 to all cold spell skill gems. This time however, I simply went the recombination route. I alt spammed 2 staves, one with cold.multi and one with +3, and then I would just recombine until I managed to get a staff with both of the mods on. And then for the next step, what we needed was 2 open prefixes and an open suffix. In this case I annulled and actually hit the correct one, and then it was time to multimod. We craft on can have up to 3 crafted modifiers. And then for the 2 prefixes we want spell damage and quality of socketed gems, as Wintertide brand scales really well with quality to gems. However, that meant slotting our Wintertide brand into our staff, so we quickly had a 6-link it, get the correct colors on it, and then the staff was done. Make sure that the quality of gems hits 8% so that we actually hit the next breakpoint, and then we've got ourselves a nice 40% more damage upgrade. Other than just needing a ton of alteration orbs, this was an easy enough upgrade and probably something I should have done a while ago. Then whilst farming Betrayal during maps one day, we managed to obtain ourselves an Endurance Charge Fractured Ring. This is something I've been looking out for a while, as this is going to relate to the next upgrade that we're going to make. What is that upgrade, you might ask? Well, if you've watched the Glacial Cascade Elementalist that I did earlier this league, you will know one thing. I love explosions. And whilst we were farming the cold damage Light of Meaning, the King in the Mists also happened to drop a Hex Pass support, one of the new exceptional skill gems. This support gem causes supported curse skills to affect hexproof enemies. It also makes it so that they cannot deal crit strikes, giving us a bunch of survivability too. And when I saw this drop, it got me thinking. If we manage to obtain another source of additional curse, then we can ditch Unholy Authority and instead spec into Profane Bloom. This would give me my beloved Occultist pops, while also helping fix one of Wintertide's problems for a lot of people, which is usually clear speed. The simplest option we have available for a +1 curse is to add in another Dweader's Damning Ring. Then we also make sure to link Hexpass support to our Eldritch Blasphemy and Feeble, and we also add in both Hex Bloom and Hexpass support to our 4-link Bane setup or a 6-link Curse setup. And finally, I reroll the Eldritch Implicit on my helmet for some increased mana reservation efficiency, to counteract the increased mana cost from Hexpass support on our Blasphemy. And then the last thing we change, of course, is swapping over to Profane Bloom. The Hex Bloom support, along with our massively increased brand attachment range from Seeker runes, makes it so that we can clear a lot of content very easily. The curses proliferate, Wintertide brand attaches from massive range, enemies explode, and then the curses keep going and going and going. Although it's not exactly an auto bomber build, it does feel really cozy to play. And that's a good thing too, because as you can see in the screen, we are heading back into Breach. The double Dweader's Damning setup is only temporary, as there is a much better ring that we can equip to help us with our additional curses. Anathema. However, this ring is a tier 2 unique, and so far I have not been lucky at all with obtaining it. So the idea is to head back into Breach, again, farm up a bunch of ancient womb gifts, and then just spam the tree, such as the life in SSF. Thankfully for you all, however, we can condense the next 3 days of farming down into a small montage. That's not Anathema. And after a couple of days of spamming Breach, I'd finally obtained Anathema. All we needed to do now was craft our other ring, so we loaded up some maps with essences, turned all of these special essences into essences of delirium, and then we used them on the fractured ring that we had found earlier. Then once we had obtained good enough suffixes, in this case a tier 1 cold resist, I was going to keep it simple and just spam suffixes cannot be changed to Reforged defense. However, I was running out of currency pretty quickly, so I eventually ended up settling for a very mediocre set of prefixes. However, at this point, I didn't have a lot of currency left, and I was really eager to test out the Anathema setup, so I settled for this one. I also still wanted to recraft my helmet with a Deafening Essence of Loathing for some extra mana reservation efficiency. The remaining mana in this build was a little bit tight at this point, so the helmet needed to be recrafted. Thankfully, the tree provided a very nice fractured base for us very quickly, and within a couple of Deafening Essences of Loathing attempts, we managed to hit some pretty good suffixes. Then we hit a good old Exalt Slam as Chris intended, and we hit an OK hybrid mod. Take it to the crafting bench and craft on flat ES, and we have ourselves a pretty thick helmet. And then we use our Eldritch Orbs to fix the implicits. Once again, we go for mana reservation efficiency and cast speed. And with that quick upgrade, we have ourselves a new helmet. We also changed the suffix on our boots to increase the effect of non-damaging ailments to get some extra chill effect, and after swapping some resists around, we are pretty much good to go at this point. There's still a couple of pieces here and there that could be upgraded, but overall I'm very happy with where the build is currently at. I wanted to take the build for a spin against the bosses and revisit the Shaper and the Elder. We fought them at the end of the first episode, and I kinda just wanted to see how the damage was looking now. Yeah, that damage was looking much better. However, there was one more reasonably attainable upgrade remaining that could push this damage much further. However, I am also fully aware of my own skill set, or lack thereof, and I know that if I were to go for this upgrade, I would lose all of my XP. The best way to stop myself from losing XP is to just hit level 100 instead. So before my final bit of bossing, it was time to take a small detour and push this character to 100. And there we have it, a very smooth level 100. I had died 44 times up to level 100 at this point, and considering this is one of my self-concocted SSF builds, that's a new record for me. And now that we were level 100, it was time to get back to farming. The last upgrade that I wanted to make to this build was going to be an Ashes of the Stars. I've mentioned it before, but Wintertide brand scales really nicely with quality to gems, and Ashes of the Stars provide plenty. Even compared with the really nice +1 cold dot multi cast speed amulet that we made before, an Ashes of the Stars will still give us about 30% more damage. To get that amulet in SSF, however, we'd have to take down the Uber Eater of Worlds. Now, I will fully admit here, I'd only ever killed Uber Eater of Worlds once. However, I was still feeling pretty confident, but this build was going to be put to the test for sure. So for one final time in this build, let's get to farming. And at the cost of 2 deaths, we finally managed to take down the Uber Eater of Worlds. It's definitely not the fastest kill of Uber Eater, but it's a kill, and that's all that matters. No amulet this time though, so we'd have to go back. I did mention I was new to the boss. Yeah, that one hurt. and with a couple more deaths on the second Uber Eater kill, we managed to get the amulet. We divine it so that it's at least 28% quality, and then we have our new amulet. And with this final upgrade, I think the character is at this point complete. However, before we move on, there's still one more thing I'd want to do. Up to this point, I'd been saving every single one of my Barya invitations, and I think it was time to run them. Maybe we'll get lucky and hit a good belt as inspiration for the next character. Who knows? So let's open up these invitations, see what's inside, and get lucky with a big belt, yeah? Sadly, we didn't hit anything big, so we'll have to leave it at that. As I said before, I think there are still plenty of ways to get better with this character. There are still plenty of avenues for upgrades to go. You could look into a Coward's Legacy belt and going pain attunement. There are always better weapons, you could go wand and shield with the S on block, there's better jewels, plenty of upgrades to be made. However, I am pretty satisfied with what the character is currently at. I managed to take down an Uber in SSF, the build does good damage, we hit level 100, and I'm starting to eye my next build. As always, you can find the POBs down below in the description if you're looking for some more info. If you've made it this far into this experiment with me, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all your feedback and all your comments. Over the next 2 weeks or so, I'll probably be playing the new Torchlight Infinite League, as I also really enjoy playing that game, despite me being relatively new to it. I'll most likely end up making a video or two about it as well, so make sure to check that out. And then after that, there's one more build that I want to play in PoE as well, as I'm having a lot of fun with the Mirage League. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'll hope to see you in the next one. Until then, peace.